Now I want to show you sort of how to do basic color correction and some tricks for color grading, which is where I feel like you sort of enhance the image, not just sort of correcting things that could have been exposed better or have the color incorrect on. So we're going to use an example from Blade Runner. We've got two shots here back to back. We've got the original image and then we've got sort of what I did to that image. And this shot actually is a PNG file. So let's go bring it in and then I'll sort of show you sort of what I did to get it this far. So you're going to want to import your clip, which you will find this if you want to go to your clips bin and go maybe into your image fixing set. If you have that, if you don't, go ahead and make it. And then once you're in there, you can go import. We're going to go to set 1. We're going to go into the green screen section. And then we are going to go down to Blade Runner plate. So we're in set 1, green screen, Blade Runner plate, PNG. Go ahead and import that file in. And of course I already have it, so I don't need it. Alright, so if I double click it and load it, this is sort of what it looks like when we first bring it in. It's obviously very moody, it's very, yellow, it's very orange, it's very smog, they were going for a look and it looks great. But we could do a lot of damage to that and take it in this direction, all without doing a whole lot really of effects work. So what did we do to this? Well, let's do our own example. I'm going to go back into the sequences and I'm going to make a new sequence. I have a new sequence bin here. So I'm going to go to the new sequence bin and I'm going to go File, New Sequence. And I'm going to do the same old. I'm going to use my preset, which again is going to be 2398. Doesn't really matter. 1920 1080 is the key. It's not going to have any moving video, so it's not a huge deal. And I'm going to call it Blade Runner color. So now my sequence gets loaded. I have my shot over here. I'm just going to grab a second or so of it because I don't need a lot. We're not really going to even play it. And I'm going to drag the video down here. And when I let go, it should show up. However, if your preferences are set correctly, at least, it should give you letterboxing here. If you know you're bringing in something that is not 1920 1080, then you want to make sure your preferences are always set to basically scale that image to be as big as it can be without losing any of the image. So what does that really mean? Well, if I go to the preferences, which on a Mac is here in the Premiere Pro menu, but on a PC it is in the Edit menu, I believe, and we go to Media, there is a section in the preferences that allow you to tell it what to do when the file doesn't match the sequence scaling size. All right, so there's a whole bunch of settings in here. Of course, Premiere definitely has a million different preferences, which is nice. We're going to go into the media section and we are going to look at these top 4 here, and we're going to go to the bottom of these 4 and we want default media scaling, meaning when it needs to be scaled, what do you want me to do with it? So it can do nothing, which is not going to help you at all. It can scale to frame size, which actually might do things you don't really want it to, or you can set it to set to frame size. And that is the option that I have found works best. So it's the bottom of these, and if you have it set, it should drop it in and give you a little bit of letterbox here while still maximizing whatever the largest proportion was. If it was overly tall, the tall would touch and the wides wouldn't touch. But basically it does the best it can without warping the image to sort of fit it in this thing. All right, so now I'm going to zoom in my timeline so I can see what I'm doing. And we are going to open the Lumetri panel, or Lumetri. I've heard it both ways, right? So we're going to go to the window menu at the top, and we're going to go to Lumetri color. And when you do that, it defaults to being here on the side of the image, which is fine for what we're doing. It probably didn't default to this. It probably defaulted to looking more like this for you. But basically, these are the controls to make things brighter, darker, and change color. Now here's the thing. The Lumetri color is like an effect. Okay, as soon as we touch any of these, it's going to apply it to the clip, and you'll be able to see more the same controls that are on the right hand side will be available to you under effects controls. But as soon as I touch anything over here, it all of a sudden is an effect that shows up in my list of effects that are being used. There's nothing wrong with that. I just want you to understand that that's what it's doing. All right, so I just undid it. All right, so we're looking at this. Now, we can eyeball this. I can look at this shot and say, yeah, you know, I can get it pretty close. But when you deal with broadcast, there are hard and fast rules. And when you're trying to match shots, there are tricks to doing that. And they have given us some ability to look at these things on scopes. And they are named after the control panel themselves. The Lumetri color comes with Lumetri scopes. So let's go get those. If you go to the window menu, it's right underneath where we got the color. It is scopes, and I already have mine open here as a second tab. And if you want to take a second and actually get yours to match this, you have to go in and make sure that your vector scope's on, that your waveform is on, that it's only looking at Luma. And then that was basically how I got these to look this way. It doesn't default to this layout, okay? But what these two things do is they give you the ability to see darkest to light of the image and the colors within the image, and there are boundaries we want to stay within. We don't want to go over 100 for broadcast, which I will tell you is also a safer way to live your life online too. Don't go over 100, what's called IRE, which is levels of luminance here, or below 0. And you can go blacker than black, and it actually will create problems sometimes. So you try not to go below 0, and you try not to go over 100. And if your color gets super, super saturated, and it goes outside as if you were to see how there's like a little interconnected web here inside, imagine there's one on the outside as well. And we want to make sure that the colors we create don't go outside of those either. All right. One thing that you want to be sure if you're setting this up to look like mine to notice is clamp signal. Clamp signal should never be checked, or it literally will stop you from seeing what is being pushed too hard. It's clamping it for you, but only visually. It doesn't actually clamp it in your output. So in a sense, you're being misled by the display. So make sure that that is unchecked. But let's start sliding some things around so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm going to scale my thing up here so we can actually see the thumbnail for the clip. So simplest of things, let's start with over here on the Lumetri panel. There are LUTs. We can talk about that another time if you want. But we go to the basic tone section, and I can turn up or down the exposure. And as expected, the scene gets brighter. And you can see on the scope that things are getting brighter. And I said not to go over 100. Notice that it tries not to let it go over 100. It actually is crushing it up there, which means I just lost some detail. Before I cranked it that hard, I could see some of the skyline. But when I crank it that hard, everything gets blown out. Okay, so that's another thing. Unless that's the look you're going for, you generally don't want to do that. And even then, there's ways to make that what's considered broadcast safe without actually overdriving it like this. But let's just talk about making it a little brighter. Let's say we want it to be a little brighter. So I'm going to pull that up. Now, exposure is kind of replicating what the camera would do had it been adjusted. But the reality is you can push it in other ways. So what do I mean by that? Well, the next slider is contrast. Contrast, by definition, is there's a great distance between your bright levels and your dark levels. So in a sense, if you think of it the way this is illustrated here as 100 to 0, you're basically pulling the whole thing so that brighters get brighter and darker things get darker. So you're making sort of two adjustments at the same time, which is part of why I don't like to use contrast. But I'll show you what it does. And you can see my point. Look at the scope as it grows both up and the bottom goes down. It may be giving me a look that I like, but there are safer ways to do it. But there's contrast. Okay, I'm going to undo that. What's a safer way to do it? Well, I can go into the whites and the blacks, which is basically the brightest parts and the darkest parts, and I can move them mostly independently. It doesn't work completely like in a vacuum, but at least I have a little more control. So let's say I want to make the back of the car a little darker. So this image is showing me the correct things from left to right, just not top to bottom. Things that are like at the top of this are the things that are brighter. It happens to be the top of the image, but if there was a big bright headlight, you know, on the back of this car, we would see a spike of something up here. All right, but anyway, my point is, let's take the blacks and let's pull it down. Notice the top doesn't move hardly at all on our scope. It's only moving the bottom of the image. It's taking the blacks darker. And if I go too far below 0, it looks real deep and dark and I lose detail, but it's also way out in an unsafe zone. So I'm going to take it down as far as I can without creating problems for myself. Now, a little hairline thing here and there is not going to kill you. You just want to make sure that you're not going crazy with a ton of stuff. All right, now we have the whites, which will be the top as well. So I can go up higher, and look, I can go over 100. It's letting me go over 100, almost to 110. But the point is, it's not moving. It's still moving a lot of the image, but not the entire image. All right, then they give you some ability to mess with shadows, which is going to pretty much be things that may not be totally black, but are darker. So I can pull that up and down, and again, it minimally affects the top and bottom of the image. Not too bad. All right, let's put it where I like the contrast. I've got a good distance between what's dark and what's light. And then I have highlights. Well, that's going to not be the tip-top whites. It's going to be sort of the top region of this. So I take the highlights, I pull them up and down, and that gives me some ability to pull some of the detail of those buildings back into where I can see them. But if I pull them down, everything's sort of contingent upon each other. So I could say, well, let's pull it down so I get some of the buildings back, but let's take the whites up a smidge so that whatever is white is bright. So now I can see the buildings without overblowing them, but I still have pretty bright brights in there. All right, so that's not bad. You know, if I go back to my original shot, there's how much we changed it. That's quite a bit. Now, the next thing is the color itself. So they've given you a white balance region in here where you can make some adjustments. All right, so I'm going to go to my shot, make sure I'm on it, and I'm going to go grab this little eyedropper, and I'm going to go try to sample something that I think is white or gray in the shot. And I'm going to choose to do this, and look at that. As soon as I click it, it says, oh, that's supposed to be white. I will make the appropriate adjustments. And as you can see, we've lost some of our moodiness, but you can see that's part of how they got it to look so moody. They adjusted the white balance to be a different temperature, as it's called. So it just compensated for it and gave us a much more even scene. There it is, full screen. Here's the old one. Here's the new one. All right. So we may not want to undo that because that is a cool mood, but the point is I want you to see how powerful it is. So if you shoot something that's this wrong, you might be able to salvage it. And in many cases, just by doing an eyedropper on something white in the shot, which is another reason why it's nice to do a clapperboard or a test chart at the beginning of your footage, because that could be a nice white page of something that you know you can use as a sample. You can adjust those things. You can adjust the color here back if you think you went too far. I'm going away from blue to orange. I can go towards pink. I can go towards green. But notice it's applying it across the entire screen. Everything's getting more green for the entire shot. So that may not be what you want. So I'm going to undo the fact that I slid those around for a few times. All right. And I'm going to go to the curves area. All right. So there's basic correction. That's what was already open. There's a creative section, which has some presets that you can tinker with. Then we're going to go to curves. So what are curves? Well, curves are another way of representing the controls for what you're trying to do. So what do I mean by that? Well, right now it's selected to white, meaning it's basically this curve represents the dark things to the light things. If I wanted to get more detail out of the dark things, I would grab the butt end of this clip and I would start to bend the shot. Now here's the thing. It is bending the entire thing. So I may not want to do that. I may say, well, I want to bend just the bottom. So I'm going to create a anchor or a bending point there and an anchor point there. So now when I pull this up, look at that. It's bending in two directions. If that's more than I want, then I may need two anchor points. Now it'll let me just bring the shadows up. And there is your exaggerated example of how I was able to bring up, without affecting the rest of the image too terribly much, I brought up the dark areas. All right, doesn't look very good, but the point is that is one way to do it. I could also take it the other direction and make things more chunky and more dark. All right, but this is across the entire thing. I can actually decide, I'm going to undo those things because I don't like what it looks like. All right, I could actually say, you know, I want the red, just the red information. I want to have that kind of control. So what if we want to make the brightest part more red? Well, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create an anchor and an anchor and then a bending point, and I'm going to turn up the red. All right, if this didn't work, I can drag it down and bend it back. But the point is, I can do a lot of damage just by creating these little anchor points. So you really just have to play with it. I'm not going to pretend to be able to tell you how to do absolutely everything here. But within a certain range, I am increasing the amount of red. And the more I play with it, the more extreme it starts to look. And again, it all sort of interacts together. So if you find yourself not liking what you did, well, then maybe you just need to put a couple more anchor points in and try and get it nice. But that's kind of cool. If I wanted to put more blue, maybe in the darks, then I could go down here and say, all right, let's create an anchor that keeps this from moving too much, and let's pull the blues into the black areas. And now the back of the car has gotten more blue, but yet his jacket hasn't really changed much, and the sky hasn't changed all that much. There's a little bit of blue. Again, it's not perfect, but you can do quite a bit to create a stylized look for your footage using the color correction tools in Lumetri Color. Now, anything you do, you want to make sure you're not overdriving your image, right? So I'm going to go back to the scopes and I'm going to look. I have not gone over 100 there, and my blacks have not gone under 0, so I'm pretty good. I'm still safe. I have pushed some color almost. If you're connecting a line between red and yellow, we're almost creating an orange that's getting dangerously close, but it still is if there was a line here, it wouldn't touch it, so it's probably okay. But that's what you want to keep an eye on, because that, as much as you may like what it looks like, it may give you trouble later if you could push it too far. And that is how you can create a stylized look while still staying broadcast safe just within Premiere in the Lumetri panel.